I want to show you this. Look at this. You can see they're really bad. It's just rotten. It's just rotten. So I'm not gonna take the chance. I've got the secondary clutch off. There, I got the end bearing housing off on this side, on the clutch side, and then if we go over, pan over here to the other side, I'm just going to make this quick. I did this last night. I pulled it in and moved things around. I've got the chain case off again. I already had it all apart and cleaned it and checked the bearings. So you can see down in there, I don't know if you can see in there, but I've got to get that bottom drive sprocket off of there. So anyways, I'll get back to you. Here's the track that I got, the used one. You can see there's a pull through there. There's another one there. And there's one up there. There's about 6 or 8. But they're not structurally, it's not affecting the strength of the track. This is a single ply track. This came off of a 96 Formula something or other. Got it at the wreckers. You can see I cleaned up all these cleats here. If you ever put in a used track, clean those up because there's a pile of rust on there, and that rust wears down on your Hyfax. Before you know it, you're replacing those too. So I just took off the surface and the rough edge just so it's smooth again, just with the grinder. So I left these studs in, these ones here. They're pretty worn down. You see, they're only about a 1/4 inch above the rubber. This one here, let's pull through. I'm going to cut that out and get rid of it so it doesn't get stuck in the cog in the drive sprocket. But that's what's going to go on there. I think it's going to be okay. Alright, I'm going to cut this track off. I've got everything ready. So next step is to drop the skid frame, but I'm going to cut the track off to make that a little bit easier. Keep in mind, I've never done this before, so it's all new to me. Loosen off those track tensioner bolts back all the way. Here we go. Ta-da! Sucker ain't gonna spit out on me now. Okay, the first thing I'm gonna work on is the center skid frame bolts. Let me try and get it. So back in there you'll see those nuts welded inside there. So those are the ones I'm going to heat those up a little bit with the torch, because the last time I took one of these apart the bolt broke. So one of these bolts goes into the shaft, and then the other one holds the bracket. So I did the other side and it's a little bit loose. This is a 13mm wrench. So that seems to be alright. Someone's had these off. You can see that they've been adjusted. So I'll work on these and get back to you. Okay, so those ones came out pretty good. So we'll try these rear ones now. I know I've had these off. So let's see. I know you have to loosen one side and then tighten the other because it will start to spin. So let's see what happens here. I'd have to get the impact gun. Alright, so the skid frame dropped, the back end anyways. So I did quite a bit of work on this in the summer, greasing things up, and I can't quite remember how many bolts I took out, but I did put all those bogey wheels in. So I might have dropped that back end, I'm not sure. Everything came out pretty easy, apart pretty easy. So now we're going to do this one up here. I know this one's a bugger, so I'm just going to put the camera down and try to get this loosened up. Alright, well, I got the skid frame out. Yeah, surprisingly, everything looks in pretty good shape under here. I think someone has probably had this apart at one time. Just because all the bolts, none of the bolts were seized up. This is a 91, so anyway, so it looks pretty good. While I'm under here, I might touch up with some paint, just a brush, you know, trim clad. So we got to get this shaft out of here. I've got them loosened off, you can see over here. And on this side, I'm going to try and pull this out and leave the bearing and the seal in place. I know in the manual they tell you to pull that whole chain case off, but I've seen other guys on YouTube do it just without taking the whole chain case off. So there's really, if I can get the bearing, you know, to come off the shaft, there shouldn't be a reason why I have to. But so anyways, I'll keep you informed. So let's see what happens. All right, so I just tapped on it with the mallet, the rubber mallet on the sprocket here, and it popped the seal out, which I suspected. You can see there's the spring from the seal, and the bearing's coming out. There it is. So, well, while I have it apart, I'll check the bearing, and I know the seal wasn't leaking. Go from there. Okay, that's shaft's not going to come out without removing the chain case, just like the manual tells us. And I guess that's why they make those things. So you can see the drawing there. So I've got 5 bolts that I have to undo on the chain case, 2 on the outer part of the chain case, and then there's 2 or 3 on the inside there around the bottom sprocket. So I'll do that. Just a little note here: when you're taking these the chain case off, there's spacers, these little spacers down in here. So this one came from the bottom, so I'm just going to leave it there so I know where it is, and then there's one up here. So that aligns the shaft. So make sure that you put those exactly back the way they came out. Ensure that the shafts will be lined up. All right, it appears that I'm going to pull the chain case off. We talked about that, and I've got to get the disc brake apart. So in order to get the disc brake apart, I need to take off the air silencer, and then apparently I can reach through there from underneath, I guess, and get at the 2 bolts that hold the disc brake caliper on. Okay, I've got the airbox silencer off, and I guess you can probably see the nut from the one caliper, and the other one's over here. So I think I can get at it with a gigantic long extension. And next step to getting that chain case off. Alright, I got my 2-foot long extension, the 13mm socket, and I'm getting those nuts undone slowly. Hopefully I don't drop them. I'll have to pull out my extension magnet. Okay, so I got that to come apart. I haven't pulled it off yet, but here we go. Okay, so the chain case is off. So now to the next step and get that drive axle out from underneath there. Alright, finally. I guess that's been about an hour. I started at 6, it's just after 7 now, so not too bad, I guess. Bearings seem good. This is a little bit noisy. You know, for the sake of a few bucks. Yeah, it's a little, you can hear some noise in there, so on that bearing. I've got another one over there from that MX that I scrapped in the summertime. So it's still got the bearing on it. I don't know if you can see that. The light's not good over here. Maybe that bearing's good. This one only had 4,000 miles on it. Yeah, that bearing's much better. It's almost like new, that one. No wear in that. I don't know, it's got a little bit of slop in it. Oh, I might buy a couple new ones. It means I won't get this done till next week sometime because I'm so busy at work. But jeez, I can get these just down the road for Bearing supply. That one's got some slop in it too. So yeah, time for new bearing. I might as well get both the upper and the lower, or both sides of that shaft. Then I'm good. This thing's going to be good for another 6,000 or 8,000 miles at the rate I'm going. Rebuilding everything. Alright, so I got this. You can see that. New bearing on there. Here's the gear puller that I used. It's just a cheap thing, but it did the job to pull that bearing. That's a 6205 bearing. I just wanted to talk about the skid frame. When you pull this out, take some time to go over the skid frame and check all your bolts and your welds, and your fittings and bushings, everything. I mean, this is an old sled. I'm not overly concerned about the shocks and the suspension working that well. It hardly has any travel. I think they had 5.5 inches of travel, but I don't want it to break down. So when I'm on the trail, I'm concerned about bearings flying out and seizing up and, you know, damaging things. Okay, so I've got the drive sprocket in. I've put it up there with the track. Make sure you put the track on. If you can see that, with the arrow facing the direction of travel. Okay, I've got the end housing on the shaft, the sprocket drive shaft. I've got that bolted on. So be careful when you're putting that in. You have to push that drive shaft sprocket all the way over and hold it over there. Tighten this up and then go around the other side. Okay, so we're on the chain case side. I've got the chain case. I don't know if you can see that. You got to make sure that bearing is pushed right up against that raceway. It's really important. It's got to be in there tight. If not, you need to shim the sprocket. And don't forget about putting those spacers back in where they came from. There's one spacer up there, and there's 2 spacers. They're lying down there, down in this bolt. That bolt down there. So the one with the two shims, you need to use the longer bolt. They're a little bit longer, about 1/8 of an inch. Make sure you use the proper bolt. All these little things will make a difference in the job being done properly. So now I'll put those shims in. I'll put the 3 bolts to bolt the chain case back in, and just snug things up and double check and triple check that everything moves freely, and then I'll snug it all back up and then work on putting the skid frame in. Another little important thing is to make sure that those 3 bolts that are down there are all cleaned up. They have a brass washer on them. And don't forget to put Loctite on those. The specs in the manual call for Loctite, a blue Loctite. That's a medium strength. I just wanted to point out the play in this. You can see that's about a 1/16 of an inch down there. So I have to go to the other side and put a shim in there, tighten that up. Okay, so I'm going to take that sprocket or bearing end cover off of there, and it looks like a washer. I need about a 1/16 of an inch shim. I'll have to see if I've got one in my with my old MX parts. So there's that shim there. I just pulled it out and laid it on top. It's a little over a 1/16 of an inch, so I need to put another shim in there to help push that shaft over to the other side, to the chain case side. Okay, so I got this so-called shim. Basically, it's just a washer that pushes the bearing and the shaft over this way. So that's nice and snug in there now. There's no play at all down in there. So that's trying to get away from the shadow. So that's what you want. You want that. Everything's working fine. I've got the chain case tightened. I've got the bearing cap on the other side tightened. And we're ready to rock and roll. Here's a little tip. When you're putting this disc brake back on, put these bolts through, and then you can reach in through here, if your hands aren't too big, and pull that other half of the disc brake back. But while you're doing that, there's a little safety flap tab that you have to bend over the nuts on the other side. So you have to slide that from in through here and underneath. So it's a little bit of a tricky thing to do, but I just wanted to mention that so you don't struggle with that like I did. So you have to come in from underneath. There's a little thingy in there stopping it, that safety flap from getting through. So you have to come from underneath. Okay, so once you have those disc brake bolts tightened back up and the safety flap metal things folded over the nuts, you can go ahead and tighten up your top sprocket here. This is a 39 foot-pounds, so you need to you need to hold your disc brake lever and then tighten it to spec, and then put your cotter pin in. Make sure your cotter pin's not too long, because it will rub on the crankcase housing and it will cut a hole right in it. So that's really important. You make sure that it's cut short and it's not sticking out past the nut. So the cover's back on. I put the cotter pin in and bent it around the nut so it's not gonna scratch a hole. I checked that already. It's not rubbing. It's nice and tight actually. And tighten up your chain, hand tight only. Just turn it up with your hands until it's snug, and then put the cotter pin into the hole. You can back it off a little. That's better than being too tight. So then I'm going to go underneath now and put the seal in. Okay, I don't know if you can see that. You can see it there. The seal's out. So I'm going to push that in, and that should be in flush with the chain case housing, or just slightly in. It will actually, there's a groove in there that it should just pop in. But take your time when you're doing this and make sure it goes in all the way around. Don't use any sharp tools because you'll puncture it. Okay, so there, that seal just popped right in. I cleaned all that as well. Make sure you clean out all the grooves in the chain case and the grooves in the seal, and that will get it. Make sure it's 100% sealed all the way around. You don't want oil leaking out of there all the time. So there you go. I painted underneath as well. This side, I can't get the light over there, but there you go. This side's all done. I'll grease that, put the oil in the chain case, and get working on the skid frame. Alright, I've got the rear skid frame back in. What I did was I lifted the back end way up, higher than this, and then I was able to get that skid frame in there. It's not easy. There's no kidding. It's an awful job. So, but it's in there. Make sure you've got your suspension laying the proper way. I mean, like the bolting points. And so what I've done now is I've lowered it down, and I'll just keep lowering it down until I get that front bracket in position, and then I'll snug that one up, just get the bolt started, and I'll work my way back. See if that works. Just a little tip here: when you're putting your bolts back in, your suspension bolts for your skid frame, use anti-seize lubricant on the ones with the lock washers. The bolts with the lock washers. You see this one on the right? That doesn't have a lock washer, and that goes in the back suspension shaft, and it needs to have Loctite. So it's the blue medium grade Loctite. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I've got the last suspension bolt ready to go in. I won't lie to you, this is a lot of MacGyvering to get this thing in here. I had to put this 2x4 in here to stop the suspension from dropping down. That kind of holds it up. You get it in position, and I put the jack underneath, which is a good way to do that. That's pretty normal, standard procedure. And then I have the jack to lift it up and down, but still it's really hard to get those bolts in there, so be patient. It's going to take about a half an hour to get all that in there. If you're lucky, it'll go in right away, but I wasn't. Alright, so I'm getting things back together. I've got the secondary clutch and the belt back on, the air box. So now I'm doing the oil in the chain case. What I use is it's that Max Gear Royal Purple. It's a synthetic oil. It's supposed to be top quality. It's extremely expensive, but it takes about almost 9 ounces, 8.8 ounces. And check the oil with the dipstick sitting on top, not screwed in. So put that within the lines on the dipstick and you're good to go. Okay, I'm down to the last step. I've got the my 16-pound weight hanging there. I weighed that with a scale. So I just hung that right on these idler wheels here. That's what the manual tells you. So measure here, you got an inch. It's supposed to be 1 inch and 9/16. So I got to loosen off the track a little bit. Better off to keep the track loose than tight. It reduces friction and you lose horsepower when you've got the track too tight. Okay, I've set the it's quite loose. I don't know, that's what the manual says, but I'm gonna center the track now, and that's it. So then I'll tighten up these bolts here, and I'll leave that for now. Once I run it on the snow, I'll double check that track, and I think it might have to be tightened up a little bit. So we'll just set the alignment of the track, and then the job's done. Alright, well that concludes the tutorial on changing a track on an old 91 Formula MX. I hope you enjoyed the video I put together. I know it's not professional. I'm not a professional, and by no means do I think that I know everything. So when you guys make your comments and you know, that stuff, just keep in mind I'm just a guy working in the garage right here in my own garage, just tinkering. So just trying to help some guys out that might not know some stuff. So anyways, thanks for watching.